welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. The Deeper Thinking podcast is produced as an independent, ad-free project. Its episodes are digitally narrated to manage the demands of research and editing while ensuring each installment is engaging, ethically considered, and attentive to nuance. We were taught to believe that mind is the place where truth begins. Long before we had words for our experience, we inherited a hierarchy that placed thought above sensation, narrative above pulse, interpretation above breath. The culture around us rewarded composure over contact, language over feeling, and coherence over truth. What lived in the body was treated as raw material to be managed, explained, or ignored. The split was not presented as a wound. It was presented as intelligence. But the body never agreed to disappear. Long before we could name memory, it was already storing what we could not speak. Long before thought learned to categorize, the nervous system was assigning meaning through contraction, pause, acceleration, and withdrawal. The split between thinking and sensing was not natural, it was trained. And what was trained can be unlearned, but not by returning to the mind for instructions. What we now call somatic truth is not new, it is only newly permitted. What Bessel van der Kolk mapped in trauma was not discovery so much as translation. The body was already keeping score long before anyone listened. What Gabor Maté articulated about adaptation was already evident in the way breath changes under threat or affection. What Peter Levine traced through incomplete survival responses was not innovation, but recognition of cycles the body never abandoned. And long before the language of diagnosis and recovery, Maurice Merleau-Ponty was pointing to the body as the place perception begins, not the place thought arrives after the fact. These perspectives did not create what they described. They caught up to it. They named what the body always knew. That experience does not wait for cognition to make it real. That intelligence is not confined to language. That memory is not a narrative, but a posture, a reflex, a rhythm in the breath. We do not suffer because the body is confused. We suffer because we were taught to abandon its knowledge in favor of something more legible to others. The mind became the narrator of a story it was never meant to author alone. It explained what it could not feel and organized what it could not touch. What looks like dissociation is often obedience to an inherited instruction. Stay understandable, even if it means becoming divided. The work ahead is not to dismiss the mind, but to return it to proportion. Understanding has its place, but it cannot replace contact. The body has been speaking in every moment we believed ourselves silent. It did not leave, it was left. We learn early to measure ourselves by what can be explained. The mind becomes both narrator and negotiator, arranging experience into sentences we hope will make us palatable or at least legible. But while the mind is busy building order, the body keeps a different record. Before we know how to name anything we feel, sensation has already assigned weight and temperature to the moment. Breath shortens before language arrives. The stomach tightens before a story forms. The pulse rises before we know why. Long before thought claims authority, the body has already responded. Most of us were not taught to recognize that kind of knowing as intelligence. We were praised for articulation, not for noticing the tremor in the hands. We were encouraged to make sense, not contact. The body's signals were treated as interruptions rather than instructions, so we learned to override them in favor of coherence. We built internal distance disguised as maturity. We spoke with composure while our ribs held their breath against the pressure of unspoken things. This split does not announce itself as rupture. It creeps in through repetition. Each time a sensation rises without acknowledgement, the body absorbs the cost. Each silence around fear, anger, or shame becomes another layer of tightening. What could have moved through becomes what must be carried. The jaw holds what the mouth never voiced. The diaphragm guards what the chest could not release. The back supports weight that was never named. The mind writes a version of events that leaves out the parts of us that had no permission to exist. Over time, we become fluent in stories that do not include our own pulse. We describe childhood, loss, heartbreak, or survival as if these things happen to an idea, rather than a living system with tissue and breath. We convince ourselves that understanding is the same as contact. But what the mind explains, the body still embodies. Memory is not just narrative. It is contraction, stillness, flinch, and withdrawal. It is the pause before answering a harmless question. It is the way the gaze drops when someone lingers too long. It is the subtle tilt of the shoulders away from closeness. The body is not waiting for us to find the perfect language. It is waiting for us to return to what we abandoned in order to be acceptable. Its signals are not fragile or incidental. They are the remnants of every moment we survived by leaving ourselves. To feel them is not to regress. It is to re-enter the truth of what has always been happening beneath the surface of our explanations. The body never forgets what it was forced to postpone. It does not record events the way memory does. It records the movements that were interrupted, the words that were swallowed, the impulses that had nowhere to go. What looks like anxiety, dissociation, muscle tension, or digestive chaos is often not a reaction to the present, but the continuation of something that never got to finish. The body is not reacting. It is still trying to complete a sentence it was never allowed to speak. People assume pain in the body is random or mechanical, but symptoms are rehearsals for an action that was once necessary and then forbidden. A clenched jaw may not be stress. It may be the last attempt to hold in a scream that would have led to punishment. Frozen shoulders may be the memory of hands that wanted to push someone away but knew they would be overpowered. The body does not act symbolically. It continues what was interrupted. Dissociation is not absence. It is precision. It is the nervous system performing surgery on consciousness to prevent unbearable contact with reality. When a child cannot escape or fight, awareness is the only thing that can move. The mind leaves so the body can survive. Over time, people confuse this split for a flaw in their character or a defect in their attention. In truth, it was the most exact adaptation available. What gets called repression is often manual labor. The body holds back tears because it once learned that crying leads to abandonment. It slows digestion because it learned that relaxing is unsafe. It collapses in exhaustion, not from overuse, but from the constant work of containing responses that were never completed. Fatigue is not depletion. It is effort without movement. Trauma is not what happened. Trauma is what had to be stopped. The body stores the attempt, not the event. That is why talk alone cannot undo it. Insight does not finish what the muscles began. Understanding does not extend an arm, unclench a stomach, or let a diaphragm expand. The body is waiting for permission to do what it was wired to do long before language arrived. People say the body keeps the score as if it were keeping books on the past. It is not tracking history. It is insisting on completion. Panic attacks are not malfunctions. They are exit routes that were blocked decades ago. Chronic pain is not random misfiring. It is the sound of a signal still trying to deliver a message. Nothing leaves until it happens all the way through. You don't start by pretending. You start by disappearing. Long before someone learns how to perform, they learn which parts of themselves make other people uncomfortable, overwhelmed, disinterested, or ashamed. The self doesn't get abandoned all at once. It gets sidelined one reaction at a time. You stop crying because it annoys someone. You stop asking because it exhausts them. You stop shining because it threatens them. These aren't choices, they're erosions. What people call personality is often a record of what once kept them from being left. You learn to be funny so no one notices you're lonely. You learn to be useful so no one discards you. You learn to be agreeable so no one punishes you. The first abandonment isn't when others walk away. It's when you start editing yourself to keep them from doing it. By the time someone reaches adulthood, the performance has solidified so completely that they forget it was ever optional. They say, I'm just not emotional. I've always been the strong one. I don't need much. As if these are truths instead of scars that learned how to speak. The tragedy isn't that they had to adapt. It's that they mistake the adaptation for identity. Self-betrayal becomes muscle memory. You leave your own needs mid-sentence without even noticing you've walked out on yourself. The nervous system enforces the contract long after the environment that required it is gone. You keep disappearing even when no one is asking you to. You call it autonomy. Your body calls it exile. Most people don't realize they've never met the version of themselves that didn't have to earn belonging. They only know the one who negotiated for it. And the longer you perform, the harder it becomes to believe there was ever anything underneath. You start to think the mask is your face. You defend it because it once defended you. The most painful part isn't that others failed to see you. It's that you learn to assist them in not seeing you. You became palatable, predictable, safe for other people to consume. You participated in your own disappearance because the alternative felt like annihilation. The price of inclusion was self-eviction. There's a grief no one talks about, mourning the life of the person you never got to be. Not the adapted self you built to survive, but the original one you exiled so early you didn't even get to remember them. Healing doesn't start with self-discovery. It starts with admitting there's someone you abandoned before you knew their name. The hardest reunion is not with others, it's with the parts of you that waited in the dark, assuming you'd never come back. The mind is skilled at disguising distance as clarity. We talk about our histories, our fears, our longings, as if narration were proof of contact, but explanation can become a buffer between us and the very sensations we claim to understand. We describe the architecture of our wounds without ever touching the walls from the inside. Language steps in as a translator and quietly becomes a shield. We start to believe that naming a pattern is the same as feeling the place it lives. This is not dishonesty, it is adaptation. Many of us survived by becoming interpreters of our own experience rather than participants in it. When sensation felt too consuming, we rose into thought. When anger erupted in the chest, we redirected it into analysis. When sorrow pressed against the throat, we turned it into a story with clean edges. The mind learned to respond before the body had its say. And eventually the sequence became so familiar we forgot there was another way of knowing. The problem is not that thought exists, it is that thought was conscripted into doing work it was never meant to do. Insight cannot dissolve a clench, reflection cannot unwind a muscle guarding against impact. Interpretation cannot complete a cycle of fear that never had space to move. Yet we keep trying, because thinking offers the illusion of movement without the risk of surrender. It lets us orbit the truth without falling into it. Even healing can become a performance of distance. We collect explanations for our behavior as if assembling a map could return us to the territory. We speak about nervous systems, attachment, trauma, embodiment, but the body remains outside the frame. We listen to the mind describe how we feel while the actual sensation waits in the gut or jaw or chest without acknowledgement. We confuse articulation with arrival. There is a subtler cost to this pattern. The more we rely on thought to mediate experience, the more we teach the body that its signals are secondary. Over time, the body adapts by quieting what is repeatedly ignored. What once showed up as heat becomes static. What once rose as trembling becomes absence. Numbness is not the lack of feeling, it is the accumulation of unanswered attempts to be felt. Reconnection does not begin with eliminating thought, but with dethroning its authority. The mind does not need to vanish, it needs to take a different seat. There are truths that cannot be reached through explanation, only through contact. Sensation is not the opposite of understanding. It is the ground from which true understanding can emerge if we let the body speak in its own timing. We learn to speak about healing long before we learn how to feel what requires it. The language arrives cleaner than the experience. We talk about boundaries, regulation, awareness, as if naming the architecture were the same as inhabiting the rooms. The mind builds frameworks while the body waits, unconvinced. We gather insights like tools but rarely ask who inside us is expected to hold them. Explanation becomes a performance of closeness that does not require us to touch what lives beneath it. For many, the first version of healing is an attempt to become more acceptable. We try to quiet what once drew disapproval, soften what was called too much, conceal what once provoked withdrawal. Growth becomes a polishing of the self rather than a return to the parts we abandoned. We pursue transformation as a way to be chosen rather than as a way to come back to what was exiled in us. The body recognizes the difference even when the mind does not. It will not open just because the language is gentle. Some attempt to heal by rearranging their thinking, convinced that clarity should dissolve what the body still holds. But cognition cannot metabolize what was never given space to complete. Muscles hold events that the mind declared finished. Breath remembers what memory has smoothed over. The nervous system continues to respond to ghosts. The intellect has already reasoned away. We call it overreaction, when often it is accuracy without context. There is also the kind of healing that tries to overwrite the past with better stories. We speak affirmations over places in us that are still in survival, as if declaring safety could undo what was learned in the absence of it. The body does not update because the vocabulary has changed. It updates when experience changes in real time, when what once led to pain is met with something different again and again without demand. Even practices meant to foster connection can become rehearsals of avoidance. We check in with ourselves the way someone might check a box. We approach sensation like a task rather than a conversation. We go still not to meet what is there, but to manage it into something tolerable. Presence becomes another strategy of control. The body notices when it is being observed instead of accompanied. Real healing does not begin with self-improvement. It begins with the parts of us that never had the chance to finish what they started. It begins when sensation is allowed to rise without immediate correction, when emotion is not rushed into meaning, when the body does not have to translate itself into language to be believed. Some truths cannot be integrated through insight. They have to be felt in the places they first appeared without being asked to disappear. Some parts of us learned that visibility is dangerous, not because anyone said it outright, but because the body registered what happened when we were fully here. A flinch in someone's eyes, a withdrawal of warmth, a silence that followed our intensity. These moments taught the nervous system to step back before the world could push us away. Withdrawal became instinct, not preference. To stay half present was safer than risking the full consequence of being felt. Over time, absence became a strategy refined through repetition. We learned to leave ourselves before anyone else could. The exit was rarely dramatic. It happened in small practiced movements, a breath held too long, attention drifting just enough to dull contact, a thought inserted between sensation and awareness. The body moved into the background while the mind took over the front of the room. Dissociation wasn't a failure to cope. It was competence in an environment that didn't know how to receive what was real. Even now, when circumstances change, the reflex persists. The body does not update its strategies just because the mind declares, it's different now. It waits for evidence. It waits for the moment intensity rises to see whether someone turns away. It waits for the sound of disappointment, for the subtle recoil, for the confirmation that presence still costs more than distance. Until those signals fail to arrive enough times, staying hidden feels like wisdom, not retreat. What looks like disengagement from the outside is often precision. The body has rehearsed how much to reveal without triggering rejection. Aliveness is rationed in increments the world has historically tolerated. Even longing becomes measured, spoken in tones that will not alarm. The deeper impulse is not to avoid connection, but to survive it. We do not disappear because we don't care. We disappear because once we cared without protection. There is grief in recognizing how effectively we learn to vanish, not the loud kind, but the kind that sits under the sternum like a quiet acknowledgement of what was once necessary. To come back into contact is not a matter of choice. It is a matter of safety recalibrated over time. The body needs more than reassurance. It needs proof that it can surface without being met with dismissal or intrusion. It needs presence that does not demand performance or retreat. Re-entry is not dramatic. It happens in increments so small they are easy to overlook. A breath that arrives without bracing, a pause that doesn't end in retreat, a moment of being seen without shrinking. These shifts do not announce themselves, they accumulate. What once felt impossible becomes tolerable, then familiar, not because the past is forgotten, but because the body finally encounters a present that does not repeat it. Relationships don't just reveal who we love, they expose how we learn to survive other people. Most conflict isn't about content, it's about nervous systems trying to negotiate safety without the participants realizing it. Two adults can look like they're arguing about logistics when they're actually pleading with ghosts. What gets said is rarely what the body is reacting to. Projection isn't an intellectual flaw, it's a survival reflex. The mind assigns old meanings to new faces, so it can predict danger faster than reality can unfold. Someone hesitates before answering and their partner feels abandoned, not because abandonment is occurring, but because abandonment is remembered. The argument starts with dishes or timing, but ends with the unlived past roaring through the present. The most explosive dynamics often come from mismatched survival styles. A person who manages fear by pursuing connection will collide with someone who manages the same fear by withdrawing. One escalates to be seen, the other disappears to stay safe. Both think the other is the threat. Neither realizes they're reenacting the only dance their bodies ever learned. Even kindness gets distorted in systems shaped by fear. One partner overfunctions because care once meant control. The other underfunctions because receiving once felt like debt. They exhaust each other while trying to protect themselves. Love languages become defense languages when survival scripts are running the show. Emotional labor often hides as competence. The one who anticipates needs, absorbs moods, softens tension. They didn't choose that role. They were trained into it long before intimacy began. Their partner might think they're naturally accommodating. They're not. They're preemptively preventing rupture. Resentment builds where needs go, unnamed. But unspoken needs aren't always suppressed out of pride. Sometimes they were never allowed to exist in the first place. You can't express what you were taught to bury. So instead of asking, people hint, withdraw, punish, or endure. Miscommunication is often mislabeled silence. Some people don't know they're lonely in a relationship until regulation hits a wall. They show up, they listen, they provide, but they don't feel met. Not because their partner is cruel, but because mutuality was never modelled. They keep giving in hopes that reciprocity will emerge, but what was never practiced cannot be improvised. Even empathy can get weaponized unintentionally. The partner who collapses into self-blame during conflict isn't always taking responsibility. They may be trying to stop the other person from leaving. Apology becomes a sedative, not a repair. Without awareness, remorse can reenact abandonment panic rather than healing anything. The cruelest illusion is believing that love alone rewrites survival patterns. It doesn't. The nervous system does not update just because someone is safe. It updates when the body has repeated experiences of safety while activated. Until then, every argument risks becoming archaeology. We're not just partnering with a person, we're partnering with the sum of their adaptations. Intimacy isn't achieved by understanding each other's preferences. It begins when both people realize they're not actually at war with each other. They're at war with what came before. Memory isn't a timeline, it's a sensory archive. What people call overreacting is often time travel without consent. The body doesn't distinguish between what happened then and what resembles it now. A smell, a tone, a facial expression, a pause. Any of these can pull someone into a state their mind can't logically justify. They say, I don't know why this bothers me so much. Their nervous system knows exactly why. Dissociation isn't always dramatic or noticeable from the outside. Sometimes it's losing pieces of a conversation, forgetting what you walked into a room for, or feeling like you're watching your life instead of living it. These aren't glitches, they're exits. When sensation threatens to flood, the mind takes the back door. Some people have spent so many years half present that they think that's what being calm feels like. Repetition doesn't mean someone didn't learn the lesson. It means the original wound never completed its cycle. People recreate situations that mimic their past, not because they want pain, but because the body is still trying to resolve what it couldn't finish. Unconscious reenactment is not self-sabotage. It's the nervous system pulling the file again, hoping this time the ending will change. Grief accumulates when there was no permission to feel it the first time. The loss of childhood safety, unmet needs, invisible burdens, these don't evaporate with age, they calcify. Adults mourn through irritability, apathy, self-judgment, or inexplicable sadness. Mourning what you never got is harder to name because there's no event to point to, only the echo of an absence. Identity can get built around what once ensured survival. A person might cling to beliefs like I'm the strong one, I don't need anyone, or I'm better alone, not because they're confident, but because relinquishing those beliefs would unravel the scaffolding that kept them upright. To update a self-concept, the body has to feel safe enough to retire the old one. The mind edits memory to preserve belonging. Children blame themselves for neglect or chaos because believing something's wrong with me feels less threatening than the people I rely on cannot protect me. Self-blame is the first draft of coherence. That draft tends to get published for life unless interrupted. Even the idea of healing can trigger defense. If someone spent their whole life bracing for impact, relaxation feels suspicious. Stillness wakes the hypervigilance that movement kept quiet. People say they want peace, but their nervous system may reject it because peace was never paired with safety. The past doesn't stay in the past just because it's old. It stays until the body stops reliving it. You can understand your history with perfect clarity and still be directed by it physiologically. The work isn't about deleting memory. It's about letting the present become stronger than the imprint of what came before. What looks like resistance is often protection. What looks like stagnation is often recovery in disguise. And what looks like indifference might just be someone trying not to drown in feelings that have nowhere to land. Memory doesn't ask for permission. Reclaiming yourself isn't a breakthrough moment. It's a slow, unauthorized exit from who you were told to be. Most people don't begin healing because they feel ready. They begin because the cost of continuing as the performed self becomes unbearable. The body starts revolting in symptoms, rage, numbness, collapse, or a quiet refusal to keep pretending. What looks like falling apart is often the first honest thing a person has done in years. Truth-telling doesn't always sound brave. Sometimes it starts as exhaustion. The nervous system finally stops holding the performance together. You don't choose authenticity because it's inspiring. You choose it because the alternative starts to feel like self-erasure. The moment someone stops negotiating their existence, even privately, the old contracts begin to crack. Healing isn't becoming someone new. It's retiring the strategies that kept you alive, but now keep you constrained. The self that emerges isn't a reinvention, it's a return. But returns are disorienting when you never got to arrive the first time. People confuse the unfamiliarity of authenticity with failure, when it's really just unused truth stretching its legs. There's grief in becoming real. You mourn the years spent being digestible, the intimacy you missed while performing, the approval that was conditional, the parts of you that stayed in exile to protect the image that secured belonging. Letting go of who you had to be feels like betrayal until you realize the betrayal was required just to stay. Safety has to be relearned before it's believed. The body won't release its guard because the mind tells it to. Regulation comes from repeated proof that expression no longer threatens connection. The nervous system updates slowly, not through insight, but through new experiences that don't end in punishment, abandonment, or engulfment. Some relationships won't survive your healing, and that's not failure. It's collision with the truth that some bonds depended on your suppression. When you stop over-functioning, people who benefited from it may call you difficult. When you stop absorbing other people's discomfort, you get labelled selfish. These accusations are just evidence that the old system is losing its grip. The real self doesn't emerge politely. It interrupts. It asks for things you were taught not to need. It challenges unspoken agreements. It refuses to perform resentment as loyalty. It risks being misunderstood in exchange for being real. That risk is the doorway. You can't walk through it and stay universally acceptable at the same time. Integration isn't about harmony, it's about accuracy. The goal isn't to feel good, it's to feel true. Once truth takes up space, even quietly, the nervous system starts to reorganize around it. The body stops anticipating exile. The mind stops rehearsing apology. Presence becomes less of a threat and more of a homecoming. You don't arrive at wholeness, you uncover it piece by piece, often while doubting it exists. And the deeper work isn't about changing who you are, it's about refusing to abandon yourself, even when the echoes of the past try to convince you that you must.